So, welcome to For His Kingdom with me, Nadia Olivier, and my
Me,
husband.
DJ Willie Fee.
And it's so good to be back. It's 2025. Happy New Year. If this is your first time joining us, well, you are in for a treat because we've got a very, very special guest today. William Allen joining us. William, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nadia. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, all the way from America, living in Florida. So joining us from far, far across the oceans. And the actual thing is that William has got such an amazing story. And instead of me trying to tell you in my words, I'm going to read you the introduction that he gives on his book, on the backside of his book, Not Man Enough to Be a Woman, that he wrote. And it reads like this. It says, in October of 2023, I detransitioned after living as a woman for 30 years. Since early childhood in the 1960s, I had always wished I had been born a girl, and that desire, that compulsion, grew stronger throughout my life, ruining my marriage and bringing me to the edge of suicide in the early 90s. After fighting this compulsion for decades, I gave in to my desires and transitioned in 1993, resulting in estrangement from my father and much of my family. I blended into society, living as a woman, and the only people who knew about my past were my family and friends who knew me before, and the few who I chose to tell. Even then, they sometimes didn't believe me. Settled into my career and a comfortable life, I was content in living out the rest of my life pretending to be a woman until a divine intervention brought me to Christ and changed everything. Because of that intervention, the transgender activism coming for our children and the lies of the transgender movement, I am speaking out. I am in the fight now. So this book is a love story and an apology to my family. It's a father-son story of love and hate, a 23-year estrangement and a deathbed reconciliation. It's the story of my lifelong struggle with gender dysphoria and transition. It's the story of repentance and coming to Christ, which led to my detransition. It is my assessment and warning of the lies and the secret intentions of the trans movement of today, and it's a call to action to protect our kids. And you can get this book on Goodreads or on Kindle, and we will link some of the available resources in the video down below where you can purchase this book. So, William, without further ado, I'm not going to take too much time. The mic, the airwaves are yours. Please share your story.
Well, thank you so much. Just a little over a year ago, I completed a detransition that actually took 3 years. It's all because of what happened to me in 2019 and 2020. Before I get to that, maybe I'll just start at the beginning. The very first thing that I can ever remember in my life was wishing I had been born a girl. I don't know why. I can't explain it. About age 4 or 5, I knew that there were boys and there were girls. I knew I was a boy, but I wanted to be a girl. I had a lot of cousins. I'm an only child myself, but I had a lot of cousins, and I had girl cousins and boy cousins. They were different, but I wanted to be a girl. Now, at the time, I was not yet familiar with all the biological differences, of course, but there was just something that made me want to feel that way. I don't know why. I have since talked to other trans people, and usually they can point to something in their early life, some sort of a trauma, some sort of sexual abuse perhaps, or something else that led them into being trans or gay or whatever. I can't think of a thing. I had loving parents. They raised me well. And unless I'm totally blocking it out for some reason, I just cannot think of any reason why I was that way. And throughout my life, I always searched for the answer. I always wanted to know, why am I this way? I didn't want to be this way. And I always thought, oh, if only I knew why, somehow that would make it better. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So growing up was, if you had known me then, you never would have guessed I would be this way. I was like any of the other boys in the neighborhood, climbing trees, getting in trouble, riding our bikes, playing cowboys and Indians, and I was in the Boy Scouts. You just never would have known. But in the evenings, I had my private time. And right outside my bedroom was a big old walk-in closet that my parents put their old clothes that they didn't wear anymore. They put them in that closet. And so I would get in there and I would play dress up, like a lot of kids do. But I was dressing up in mom's clothes, not dad's. And it somehow just made things better. It allowed me to further the notion in my own mind, to fantasize that I actually was a girl. And there were women on TV that I always thought, that's who I want to grow up to be. I don't know if you guys ever do you get American TV shows there, typically?
Yeah. Too much, I think.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, that's what we foisted on the rest of the world. Sorry. There was an old TV show called Bewitched. Are you familiar with that one?
It sounds familiar.
It was about a woman who was married, but she was actually a witch, and she had these powers, and she could do things. And she was played by a woman named Elizabeth Montgomery. She was a Hollywood actress. And I always thought, I want to grow up to be her. I was cognizant enough to know that was just a TV show, and that she was an actress. I understood that. But there was something about her, that's who I wanted to grow up to be. Crazy. So, getting through elementary school, junior high school, and high school was tough because this thing was just always on my mind. And when I was young, I remember many a night crying myself to sleep, praying that God would change me in the middle of the night. I'd wake up, I'd be a girl. And even then, though, the thought crossed my mind, if that actually happened, how was I going to explain that to my parents? So that's how a child thinks. First of all, I thought it might actually happen. I knew of God. My parents had told me about God, and they would come into my room at night when they tucked me in when I was real little, and we'd pray together. But I actually thought God could do it if I prayed hard enough. And then I thought, wow, if that happens, I'm going to have to explain that somehow. What are my parents going to think? So this is kind of important later when we talk about what's going on today, because that's very representative of how children think. And I'll mention some other things as we go. When I got to high school, that it was still with me, and this feeling was getting stronger. And of course, I hit puberty, and that was tough for me because prior to that, I could dress up in the privacy of my own room and stand in front of a mirror, and I thought, wow, I look pretty good. I didn't have a lot of hair on me yet, and things like that. But yeah, puberty hit, and it just destroyed the whole image. So that was a tough thing to get through. But at the same time, I was attracted to women. I was never gay, and that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm attracted to women, yet I want to be one. I couldn't figure it. Of course, now we're into the 70s, and there wasn't a lot of information. We didn't have the internet back then, so I couldn't really just go find anything as easily as we can today. So this was tough for a teenage boy in the 70s. And I just got through it best I could. And it wasn't until I got to college, I wasn't completely out on my own yet, but I wasn't living at home. And I was taking classes, I was studying computer science, and I took a couple of psychology classes as easy electives, just to get credit. And I kept acing those classes, so I started focusing a little bit more on psychology as well, thinking that maybe I'll be able to figure out why I am the way I am. And there was one class, abnormal psychology, and in the textbook, we came across one chapter, one paragraph on one page that mentioned the words transvestite and transsexual. That was it. So, still nothing. I got through college and I got out on my own, moved out to the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. And I was working as an engineer, and I found an ad one day in some sort of, I don't know what the publication was, but I saw an ad for a support group meeting for transvestites and transsexuals, those words that I had heard back in college. And I got the number and I called and they told me what it was about, and I showed up that next week and I went in there and I saw other people like me for the first time in my life. Up until that point, I thought I was the only person in the world that felt the way I did.
Wow.
It's a lot easier for people today, but try to imagine for 20 plus years thinking I was alone. And I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't feel this way, and I never told anybody. And so I found this group, and it was a huge relief. And I'm able to talk with people, share experiences, share stories, and share our feelings. And
William, before you go
Yeah.
on, so at this point you're 20 years old, you meet the support group. You're able to put a name to this state of mind or condition, that you experience. Are you at this point suffering from depression and anxiety? Or how are
Not
you
really.
doing emotionally?
Yeah, not really. That would come later. But at the time, I was doing okay. I was out on my own, working in a professional career. So there were enough new things in my life, other things to sort of keep me occupied, things that demanded my attention as well. So this was, going to these meetings and having these thoughts. At this point, it wasn't completely taking over my life, at least not yet. Mm-hmm. So, but it was a huge relief, just to be able to find other people. And when I came to that first meeting, I saw a lot of men in dresses that looked like men in dresses. It looked really silly. But there were a couple people, and I had to wonder. I couldn't tell. Is this a man or a woman? Now, one of them, when they spoke, the jig was up. It was obviously a man. And even today, I see these men on the internet that are trying to pass themselves off as women, and they start talking, and I'm like, come on, dude. If you're going to do this, put some effort into it. Do something with your voice, really. So back to the support group meeting, the other person started speaking, and I still couldn't tell. It sounded like a woman, and I started to wonder if maybe that was just a female friend of one of the other people there. But I come to find out, no, that was a man who was in transition, and I think he had pretty much finished. Looked like a woman and sounded like a woman, and if I'd seen him on the street, I never would have guessed. And I thought, wow, so this is a thing. I didn't even realize this could happen. And so now, not only have I found others like me I'm realizing that that actually is a possibility. People can do this. They can make this change. So life went on, and I kept exploring. I got involved in a lot of other things as well. Work kept me pretty busy, but I took up a lot of hobbies. And I think to some degree, some of those hobbies were to keep my mind occupied. Because even at work, if I wasn't careful, it would always, this desire would always infiltrate, and distract me. And sometimes it was hard to concentrate on work. So I got involved in a lot of different things. And I started jumping out of airplanes and crawling around in caves and sailing, and flying even, and it kind of kept me occupied. So I actually, at one point, started going to these meetings dressed as a woman. And I had really put a lot of attention into my presentation. I worked on it. And when I got there, I got a lot of compliments. And I didn't have the voice yet, but as far as appearance goes, people were telling me that I could pass in public. And when somebody said that, the thought of actually going out in public like this and being accepted for what I am presenting myself as was mind-blowing. Because that was my desire, that was my lifelong dream, to actually be a woman. It wasn't a sexual thing, it was just, I wished I had been raised as a woman. I wish I had had all the rights and passages, of womanhood. And it sounds silly to say, when I hear myself saying this, it just sounds crazy, and it kind of is. But that's what was going on in my head, and I still didn't know why. So I continued on perfecting the presentation, and talking with that one person that sounded like a woman. Come to find out, I'm gonna have difficulty with the pronouns myself. So if I refer to a he as a she, sorry. But she told me about a voice coach, and that's what she had done. She went to a voice coach, and she was able to alter her voice. And so I went to the same voice coach. And after a few sessions, I was able to bring my voice from, usually it's down in the chest for a man, and I was actually able to bring it forward up into here, and I was actually able to make it sound more feminine. And I learned that there's a lot of other things you do with a voice other than just talking. You whisper, you sing, you sneeze, you cough, you scream, you do all these things with your voice. And women and men have different vocabularies. And so I studied all this, and I got it down. And I actually went out in public a couple times. I had a whole wardrobe built up at home, and went out in public. And the first time or two, people would notice, and I'd get, a couple weird looks. But eventually, what I was getting was indifference from people. They didn't notice. And that's what I wanted, was indifference. I could tell that they could tell. Mm-hmm. And so this was going along just swimmingly, and every step of the way I was affirmed. We hear that word a lot these days, affirming. It used to be we give children puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, surgeries and stuff, but now it's called gender affirming care. See, that's the problem with this movement. They take our language and they change it all up to try to mitigate how horrible it sounds. So gender affirming care. I got to tell you, this affirmation is like crack. Got to have it. Can't live without it. Give me more of it. Where can I find it? And I can tell you firsthand, the more I was affirmed, the more I wanted, the more steps I was willing to take, the further I was willing to go with it.
For that affirmation?
Uh-huh. Yeah. It was a great
Do you
feeling.
think that comes from a place of not having any sense of meaning or value or worth in yourself. Like, is the assessment, would it be correct to say that, especially in today's environment, that people need affirmation because they don't actually affirm themselves? So inside, they don't affirm themselves. They don't believe in their value and worth. And so that therefore, they need the world outside of them to tell them that they're good enough.
I think to a degree that's true, especially today, especially with the way children are being raised today. Children are being raised by parents who don't discipline their kids. They spoil their kids. They give them anything they want. And so these children are growing up and becoming parents themselves. And each generation, it gets worse and worse and worse. And young adults today, they don't know how to function in society. I don't know if you've heard about it, but here in the United States, I've even heard of people taking their parent to a job interview. Because, I know, right? That was, yeah, it's happening here. Because people are so insecure. And they can't even get through a job interview on their own. They have to have their parent there. And, I mean, if I was interviewing somebody for a job and they showed up with their parent, I'd tell them take a hike. Not interested. See you, bye.
Yeah.
It's the children.
How are you going to do the job?
Right. Your parent's not going to be sitting there with you helping you. So it's we've raised generations now of namby-pambies that just can't function. You know,
Yeah.
Children are not even allowed to go out and play outside with their friends in the same neighborhood, alone, by themselves. I was raised up on that. We were kicked out of the house in the morning and told to, when you hear the dinner bell ring, come on back. Or if you don't come back here, find some house to go have dinner at. Mm-hmm. And we're out getting in trouble and having fun. And we, if we get parched, we drink out of the nearest spigot or garden hose, which kids aren't even allowed to do because they're not sanitary or whatever. And, we broke bones. We fell out of trees. We got beat up and bruised and cut. Wound up in the emergency room a few times, but kids are all kept from that these days. They can't take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think to some degree what you're saying is very true. Yeah. For me at that time, no. Aside from the issue that I was dealing with, I didn't have any insecurities. I was pretty confident. I was very confident in my job, the other things that I was doing. Like I said, I was sailing and flying. I got a pilot's license. I did all sorts of things. And my life, aside from this issue, like I said, was going along just fine. Well, one day, I hopped on an airplane to go to Ohio for a family reunion. And I sat next to a girl. And I was just looking to get some sleep, but we talked the whole way. And when I got to the reunion, my parents and everybody else asked, how was the flight? I said, the flight was fine. I just met the girl I'm going to marry, and she'll be here next year as my wife. And everybody laughed, And that was the girl I married, and she was there next year as my wife at the reunion. So, yeah, I fell in love, and...
But at that point, you're still William?
Still William, oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And, yeah, still just kind of in the experimental phase. And once I met her, we started dating. She lived in Seattle, Washington, and I lived in Portland, Oregon. It's about a 4-hour drive, both on the west coast of the U.S. And I would go up and visit her on the weekends and stay with her parents. And yeah, we fell in love pretty quick. And I got to tell you, this whole thing, this compulsion that I had been dealing with all my life, was gone. I had prayed several times over my life to God to make this thing go away. In fact, at that support group meeting, their structure of the meeting was that everybody would sit in a circle and they would go around and have what they call a check-in. Everybody gets to say something about what's going on that week, going on in their life. And then after the break, they would have some sort of a topic. And I think this happened twice. The facilitator brought up the scenario, if I had a pill that you could take one time and it would make this whole desire, this whole trans desire of yours just go away forever, would you take it? That was the question. And so as it went around the circle, I heard all these other answers from these other people, and all of them said, no, I wouldn't take it. That's a part of me, they'd say, I don't want to give that up. Bless you. I've had it so long, I don't know what I would do without it. All these reasons and excuses why they would not want to give that up. They wouldn't take the pill. And I was dumbfounded. And after hearing 10, 15 of them saying these things, it came around to me, and I just looked around at everybody, and I said, yeah, I'd take it. I said, hell yeah, I would take it. In a heartbeat. I didn't ask for this. You know? Why is this taking over such a big part of my life? I never could get it, never could figure it out. I didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but I always had to deal with it somehow. So, yeah, I prayed that God would just take it away from me. And so when I met this girl, yeah, we started dating, and this whole thing went away. No more desires, and I was, oh, thank you, Lord. You've done this for me. Oh, wonderful. I got rid of my whole wardrobe, and yeah, she never knew about it. None the wiser. I thought, okay, we're gonna get married. We're gonna move on, and we moved on. We got married. 2 years into it, this thing started coming back. Up to that point, we had a wonderful marriage. We were happy. We were making plans, talking about kids. But then these desires started coming back with a vengeance. It was as if that was a separate entity that felt ignored, and it was mad.
Wow.
You know, and it was demanding my attention, and it was like saying, I'm not going to let you get away from this. And it got bad. It was taking over, and I couldn't keep it from her anymore. And so I had to tell her what was going on. And of course, she didn't want to have anything to do with that. And this is not what she bargained for. She pinned her hopes on me. You know, she wanted me to be the father of her children, and this was not working out for her. So she initiated a divorce, and rightfully so, I think. It wasn't fair to her, and I just felt horrible. You know, but going into it, I thought, yeah, we're good. And she was a Christian too. And I mean, we had it made. So divorce went through, and at the time I had been working on the house. It was a fixer-upper, and so was in the middle of a remodel, and I wanted to get that finished so that she could sell the house, because that was going to go to her. And she had already moved back with her parents. I was getting really depressed, very depressed. I mean, here I am losing my wife, I'm losing my life. Luckily, I still have my job. But depression really hit me hard. And there was a period of 5 days, 5 nights, that after I was working on the house, after my day job and after I'd work on the house for a few hours, I would sit in our spare bedroom with a gun pointed at my head. And each night, I just kept trying to work up the courage to pull that trigger. I just wanted it all to end. Now, I've known people who were suicidal, who had made attempts, and I used to know some people that actually did commit suicide. And I've talked to others about it, and it's easy to say, well, that's taking the easy way out, or it's cheating, or they're acting like God. You know, they're not God, how dare they? I get it, and all that's true. But I got to tell you, there is a pain so bad, so awful, that the idea of just not existing anymore, the idea of just killing yourself, is such a welcome relief. I mean, it seems like the hand of God himself coming down and giving you a way out. Just kill yourself. And then all this pain will be gone, you know. So my whole attitude changed, you know, about people that commit suicide. But on the 5th night, I worked up the courage, and I pulled that trigger. I pulled as hard as I could, but nothing happened. And I knew what I was doing. I mean, I was a gun guy. I had guns. I was a shooter, and it just wasn't happening. And I don't know to this day if it was just my mind playing tricks on me or if it was divine intervention, but it was as if there was an equal and opposite force pushing the trigger forward as I was trying to pull it backward. And
Wow.
I broke down and cried, and I realized that it just wasn't going to happen. So the next few days, I got the work done in the house, and I moved out, found a boarding house that I moved into, and kind of got on with my life. And it was tough being divorced. Everything was different. A couple of
And
years
when you
after
speak
that,
about it now, what do you feel? What goes through your heart
well,
when you
when I
about
speak
it now?
about it and describe it like that, I'll still choke up, you know. It seems far removed now because it was so long ago, but there's still, it still occupies a place in my memories, and it was tough. And if I think about it enough, I mean, I can be brought to tears. And I talked about it in a lot more detail in the book, and I was bawling my eyes out when I wrote it. So,
And I
when you
think
get a
that's
chance-
such an important element because, you know, especially in the Christian community, I think when we speak about being healed, you know, many of us have different varying degrees of trauma and things, you know, people go through in their lives. And it all, at the end of the day, if God allows it, it becomes our testimony. You know, if you survive it, if you, like you survive your own suicide attempt, or you get to a point where you're able to share your story. I think there's this idea that when you are supposed to be healed, that you are no longer affected by the emotion of that experience, and it's just not. I haven't found that to be the case with people. I didn't find that to be the case with me, and initially I thought that meant, oh, okay, so I'm not healed. I'm not healed because I still experience emotions when I think about what I've been through in my life. But as we deal with a lot of people, and it's okay, you know, if it's okay if you're listening to this and you've got a story and and you're a Christian and you're trusting God for your healing, and you're at a point where you are feeling ready to share your story. Don't hold back because you think, oh, I get emotional when I share it, so it must mean I'm not really ready or not healed enough. It's okay to be emotional because we're dealing with deep pain.
It really is. Yeah. Don't hold it in. Talk to somebody. Find somebody and talk. Because if you're just on your own, once you get below a certain point in your depression, it's almost as if there's no coming back. It's like your depression is going to feed on itself. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, you're right. Talk to somebody. Yeah. So, a couple of years after that, I started looking for counselors. I was at the point, I knew that this was going to ruin my life. I'm going to wind up dead probably. And I found some counselors. I wanted to make this thing go away. One counselor I talked to put me in a group session with sex addicts. And man, I wish I didn't go into that, because I heard things in there that still today disturb me. I wish I didn't know about some of the things that people do. And what I was experiencing, it was just not appropriate. That was not, I couldn't relate at all. I talked to some other counselors. I talked to some pastors too. I started looking around at churches. Now this is in Seattle, Washington, where I was living at the time. And I was picking churches that wasn't my own and just asking if I could meet with a pastor. And some of them tried to counsel me, but back then they didn't know anything about this thing. This is the early 90s. They still didn't know anything about it. It was happening, but it was still kind of a subculture, and not a lot of people were aware of it. And one pastor I went to, I described what I was facing. And I told him it's possible to actually make a transition. And I told him I had prayed for a miracle, and he says, well, maybe this is the miracle. I said, what? The fact that you can transition, maybe that's the miracle you've been praying for. Now, I'll admit, I was not a Christian at the time. I thought I was. But I knew enough, right, that I thought this guy is a whack job. And I didn't say anything further to him. I literally got up, turned toward the door, and walked out. I didn't even look back, because I knew that no, I don't think that's what God would have considered. I don't think He would have sent that to me as a miracle. So, still on my own though, and trying to find my own answers, I did actually get to the point where I realized if I don't transition, I'm going to be dead, because I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't hardly focus on my job. The hobbies that I used to be active with had all fallen by the wayside. I couldn't do those anymore. And I made a decision. I just came to the conclusion that I'm going to have to do this. And I made a decision to transition in 1992. And I started making plans. And now transitioning back then was a long process, and it was monitored very closely, and there were a lot of steps. It was designed to weed people out, okay? Because sometimes people thought, yeah, I want to do this, but then they did it, and it's not the right thing to do. So this was a very strict process, and you couldn't even have surgeries until you had actually lived in the role of the opposite gender for a minimum 1 year. Okay? And like I said, designed to weed people out. So I started, and I had to see a new medical doctor who put me on a medication to mitigate the effects of my testosterone, and also gave me estrogens to start feminizing my body. And I started letting my hair grow out a little bit. And the hormones had quite an effect. They softened my skin and changed my hair texture. Fat redistributed. I grew breasts. And at the time, I felt like I was pretty lucky. My mother she was always very well endowed. And so I actually grew some decent breasts. And the tail end of 1993 or 1992 was coming, and it was time to tell my parents what I was doing. And this is something else that's described in detail in the book. I'm just going to shorten it here, but it did not go well at all. And I had flown home for Christmas and New Year holidays to Florida. That's where my parents were. And at that point, they had already had a hint of what the deal was, what I needed to talk to them about. And it was the last night that I was there, and we finally sat down together and started having this talk. And my father did not take it very well, and he got very, very angry. And honestly, I can't say that I would have reacted differently had it been me. He was from a different era. Men are men, women are women. And he had always been proud of his boy. His boy was an Eagle Scout. That's my boy. My boy put himself through college. His first one in the named line in the family to get a college degree. That's my boy. Proud of my boy. He got a pilot's license. That's my boy. And now all of a sudden, his boy wanted to be a girl. That had to be devastating.
Yeah.
And yeah, he got very, very mad. And he said something that night. This is where the title of the book comes from. In this he was angry, and he went off in this diatribe about his sisters. He had one brother and 6 sisters. And he talked about his sisters very affectionately, and told me how superior they are to men in a lot of ways, how nurturing they are, and how they have to put up with, they have to tolerate so many things. And all of these things were true, of course. And at the end, he just got so angry and was seething, and he says, "You're just not man enough to be a woman." Now, that sentence in and of itself is nonsense, but I get what he was trying to say. And when it came time to write the book, that popped back into my head, and that was the author's title. So that's where that came from, just in case you were wondering. So that visit did not end well, and from that point on, my father and I were estranged. We didn't talk for decades. I proceeded on with the transition, and this is very detailed in the book. I'll save that for when you read that. But for me, it went very well, and I had, within that by March of 1993, I had actually made the transition from male to female as far as the way I'm living. Still a man, hadn't had any surgeries yet, but I'm living in the role of a woman, and I'm going to work and everything. I'm playing that role, and I had to do that for a year. And it was at about the year and 3-month mark is when I had the surgery. And at that point, you've had a minimum number of hours of counseling. I've had to get second opinions. I've had everything documented, affidavits signed, and then the surgeon would go ahead and do that work. And I got to tell you, man, at the time, I was thrilled. Here I am getting to live my lifelong dream.
Sorry, so William, if I can ask, just for clarity's sake, when we say the surgery, this is the this is the removal of male genitalia and the creation of female genitalia. Is this what you mean?
It goes under a lot of different names. SRS, sex reassignment surgery, GRS, gender reassignment surgery. I think the technical name is a vaginoplasty.
Oh,
and they use what they call the penile inversion technique. And basically it's they're using all the skin of the scrotum and the penis, and they create a cavity, and they basically turn it all inside out and shove it up in there and create. That's how they do that. Hang on, that was my phone.
Okay.
That was great timing. So so that's the surgery, and then for several months after that, it took a lot of I don't know how to call this, maintenance and care, for the healing, and to keep things open and all that. But after I was healed, it gets to the point where a gynecologist looking at it as the first inspection wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
I know. Really.
Wow. And you were happy at this point?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't, I mean, you didn't experience any sense of loss?
Yeah.
No,
Not at all.
nothing. Okay.
Even though, like I said, I'd been straight all my life. Now, one thing I had crossed my mind is, you know, what if I go through this? Am I still going to be attracted to women?
Yeah.
And if so, what's that? Does that make me a lesbian then? I mean, I didn't know. Some people I talked to had said that if you're straight to begin with and you go through this, usually you'll still be straight afterwards. That's the tendency. If you're gay to begin with, the tendency is you'll be gay after. Now, if you think of being straight or gay, thinking of it as a same-sex or opposite-sex attraction, right? So I had an opposite-sex attraction. So when I go through this, if I'm a woman, and I want to clarify something here. I always knew I was never a woman. You hear people today saying trans women are women. No, they're not. That doesn't happen. There's no way that could be. I was never so delusional to believe that I was actually a woman. I knew who and what I was. I was a man, a genetic and biological man, pretending to be a woman. And that was enough for me. I could get on with my life, and I was happy, right? But I wondered if I'm in this role as a woman, am I going to be a lesbian? I didn't particularly want that to happen because that's a whole other set of issues you got to deal with. And then the only other option was I'd be attracted to men. And of course, at the time, before I see JD, he's kind of, this is making him a little squeamish.
No.
Are you okay?
No, I'm perfect.
Okay.
I'm all in the details.
Yeah. I've described this, and I've seen a couple of guys, they get kind of very, very white, and I kind of worry if they're getting sick or something, getting ready to. I understand, really, I do. But I didn't particularly want to be attracted to men, or because the thought of being with a man was nauseating to me, prior to all that. After having been on the hormones for so long, and a couple of years after the surgery, I was getting attention from men. Just innocent first, just holding the door, chivalry and things like that, and then men started flirting with me.
Wow.
Now, these are people obviously that didn't know, all right? Now, there are some people, like say at work, that knew me before, and obviously my family, what little family I had left, knew me before. But new people that I met, new groups that I joined, or whatever, they didn't know. And I was thrilled about that. And I didn't bother telling anybody. So, yeah, I was getting that attention, and I started to like it. So there was that kind of attraction. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what came after that. Some of it's in the book, but not much. Yeah, I was attracted to men for a while. Mm-hmm. And I gotta say, I settled into a comfortable life and a comfortable career. I got to live and work in 3 different countries. And like I said, nobody knew except the people I told. And even sometimes they didn't believe that. I had to prove it to them. Decades went by. And I had started a new career as a truck driver. I was an engineer for a lot of years. My professional career, I got into management. I was a director level manager, worldwide tech firm and professional services team. I had people working for me all over the world. And I threw all that away one year and took a year off and traveled. And then when it was time to go back to work, I didn't want to do that anymore. And I started driving a truck. And I gotta say, it's the funnest job I ever had. And my name is Maggie, my female name. Being in the trucking world, if those guys could tell, if they knew, I wouldn't have been in that world much longer if I was still alive.
Okay.
So yeah, they just didn't know. And honestly, nobody gave me any problems. That the men were all perfect gentlemen. They looked after me, and yeah, very comfortable. 2015, both my parents died. And here
In
in Florida,
2015?
2015,
I'm sorry, what did you say? What happened then?
they died. Both my parents died.
Oh.
Yeah, my father had cancer. He was terminal, He was well into his 80s, and we knew he was going to be dead soon. My mother, she was just getting sick herself, and my mother and I had been in contact still all those years, but my father and I had not. And he was not even aware that my mother and I had still been talking. We had to do it clandestinely. And I had a little bit of family here in Florida that I was also in touch with, and they were kind of keeping me up to date. And I had been trying to get my mother to agree to let me come down and take care of her. My dad was in the hospital pretty much full time, and she needed help. And she was putting that off. I just couldn't figure it out. Again, that's in the book in a lot of detail. But she finally did agree to let me come down and take care of her. And I had already made arrangements to sell my truck. And so one night on the phone, she said, okay, you can come. And I told her, okay, I'm going to pack up the car tomorrow morning, and I'll drive across the country, and I'll see you in about 6 days. And yeah, it takes about 5 or 6 days to drive across country. And I got a call the next morning from my aunt, and she told me that my mother died during the night. Yeah. At first I thought, no, you mean Dad? She said, no, your mother. So it's totally unexpected. So I got a friend to take me to the airport, and I flew home, and my aunt and uncle picked me up at the airport. And this was the first time they had ever seen Maggie. So this was tough on them as well. And they had never really, affirmed what I had done. But they really stepped up and were just a tremendous help. And then it was 9 days after my mother died that my father died. He was in the hospital. And this is in the book in detail, and it'll rip your heart out. I'm just going to keep it real short. We reconciled in the hospital the day before he died.
Could you share more on that? If
do you want me to? Are you sure we have time? Are you able to? Okay.
Please.
My aunt and I were going to the hospital each day, and my mother was in the morgue. I couldn't even get her out of the morgue because I didn't have any juice or anything. My dad was still alive, so it was everything was still up to him. I didn't have power of attorney yet. So we were there basically to visit Dad, and my aunt would go into his room and be with him, but I didn't go in. I didn't want to cause him any grief. I didn't hate him. He was my father. I still loved him. At the time, I didn't like him much because, he had broken everything off and because of the way he reacted. But he did what he felt he had to do. And I get it. And so I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to give him any grief. Didn't want to make things difficult for him. But I was there at the hospital with my aunt for a few days. And my aunt kept wanting me to go in. And she kept asking my father, is there anybody you'd like to see? And he would say no. And my aunt and a nurse started to conspire. And the nurse there, this nurse named Maria, she said that she had talked to my father a few times, and she had asked him if he had any kids, and he said he had one son, but he hasn't seen him for quite a long time. So this nurse, meeting me as Maggie, was very confused. So my aunt explained the situation to her, and then she got it. And my aunt was very insistent. She really wanted me to go in. And I said, look, if you want to tell him that Maggie is here, and you have to make sure he understands that it's Maggie, it's not William. And if he wants to see me, okay. I mean, I'm sure he's not going to want to see me. I mean, this is a sure bet, And I said, if he can't speak, and then this gives you an idea of how bad he was, how close to death was, because he may not even be able to speak. I said, if he can't speak, tell him to blink his eyes twice if he wants to see me. So she goes in, and she comes back out after a few minutes, and she looks up at me, and she said, he blinked his eyes twice. So I'm stunned. I'm just I'm thinking, how in the world could this possibly be? And she says, I asked him a second time, and he blinked his eyes twice again. So I had been very comfortable that this was not going to be a thing, right? And I'm realizing I have to go in there. I have to follow through. I made her a promise. And so I just put my head down and I said, help me, Lord, because I couldn't get my legs working. And I went in. And honestly, I was not looking forward to seeing him. I would much rather have remembered him the way he was when he and I were still good. I did not want to see him. I did not want this to be my last image of him. But I went in and saw him in the bed, and he was just a shell of a man. Not at all like what I remembered. And so frail, and just hanging on to life. But I went over and sat down next to him, and I took his hand. I took his right hand in my right hand, and I put my other hand on his forehead. I started rubbing his forehead. When I was a kid, he'd always do that to me when I was sick, whether or not I'm throwing up into a toilet or if I'm just sick, just rubbing the forehead. It was just always so calming, and it just felt good. And so instinctively, that's what I did. And I told him that what happened between us is in the past, and if you want, I'll help you get through this. And he squeezed my hand twice. So I stayed, and we didn't have any, meaningful conversations. Like I said, it was very difficult for him to even speak. At one point, he reached out with an arm to try to hug me, I think, but he couldn't really control his limbs. So my aunt and I were there pretty much round the clock at that point, and it was the next day he died.
And he was Christian?
Yeah. I have to say, though, he was a churchgoer. He believed in God, he believed in Jesus, resurrection, all that. My mother did too. They were churchgoers. But a lot of people claim to be that when they're not. So I don't know for sure. I can't say for sure. I hope they were true believers, yes.
Just wondering whether they prayed for you, probably.
Yeah.
Very likely
I'm sure they did pray for me. And I know a lot of people in my family that prayed for me all those years. People that I was estranged from, other parts of the family that did not affirm what I did, who I'm back in touch with now. And they confirmed that, yes, indeed, they were praying for me. So, yeah. But when I had talked to my parents in 1993, that was a New Year's Day, told them what I was going to do, my father pretty much disowned me at that point. He yelled out, "You're dead to me." We had to go to the airport the next day, and my dad drove. Nothing was said. We got to the airport, my mother and I got out of the car, and I got my bags. My mother gave me a hug, and she whispered in my ear, "Nothing is forever." And so after my father had died, and I was working on the obituaries and things, that popped into my head. She was right. Nothing was forever. We were able to reconcile at the last possible minute. And then I also realized that if she hadn't died when she did, I wouldn't have been there in time to reconcile with Dad. So it's funny how things work out,
Yeah.
But
he's the reconciliation that you needed.
Yeah.
I think maybe. I'm guessing. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
And that story is a theme throughout the entire book. And it kind of starts with him, and the very end of the book comes back to him in a neat way. So, but now let's get to the good part.
Yeah.
So that was 2015. My parents died within 9 days
Wow.
of each other. And so we had a double funeral. And it took a year to settle the estate. Here in the U.S., it's something called probate. That's the process of settling an estate. And it can take up to a year. So I was here, and I set up a place to live here, and that's what I focused on. And sometimes it was a full-time job, just dealing with all the medical bills and settling things and all the accounts and getting that all dealt with. During that time, I started going to church with my aunt and uncle that were here. And they were going to a Baptist church. And I went there off and on for a couple, 2 or 3 years. And I did go back to work for a while as well, driving a truck during that time. So I was away from Clearwater for a while. But I came back, and I was going to that church a little bit more steadily in 2018, 2019. This pastor started talking about hell, sin, God's wrath, and repentance. All words that I knew, but I had never heard any pastors talking about it before. Every pastor I'd ever encountered, it was always, feel good. God is all loving. God is this, and they never, the gospel is the good news, right? Mm-hmm. They never told us what the bad news is. You got to wonder. I mean, if you go to, let's say you're sick, terminally sick, and you go to your doctor, and he has a cure. It's going to be expensive and it's going to be painful, but he's got a cure. Is that doctor just going to say, here, you got to do this? Are you going to do it? Are you going to put out this expense and go through all this pain? No. He's got to first tell you how sick you are. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and I had never really considered how sick I was. I had never really considered what my true condition was. So, I kept listening to this pastor, and I started digging into the archives of previous sermons. And I was soaking this up. And I started reading my Bible. And there were times during my life where I would read the Bible, or try to anyway, and it was just gibberish. It didn't make any sense to me. It was a tough read, But now I'm starting to read the Bible, and things are starting to open up to me. And I'm listening to all these previous sermons. And now at the time, I'm also a YouTube addict at that time. Still am. But I started stumbling onto videos by Pastor John MacArthur, Ray Comfort, Todd Friel of Wretched Radio. I don't know if any of these names are familiar with
Oh,
you.
yeah.
They're all here. Oh, you know these guys? Okay.
Yeah, I know
Paul
Living
Washer.
Waters, Ray
Oh,
Comfort. Yeah, they do good
Paul
work.
Washer, Vody Balcom, R.C.
Yeah,
Sproul.
Paul Washer.
Yeah.
He's like the weeping pastor.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's the one that did that sermon to the kids. Remember that? It kind of broke the internet almost. when he
Oh,
was
really?
talking to
No, I
kids
don't
and-
know. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's
I've
an old
got a-
one. He
I've
looks
got
very...
a,
look it up.
I've got a Paul Washer, the
Oh, look
Gospel
at you.
of Jesus
Okay,
Christ.
good.
Little,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there is a video. Look for it. He's very young, and he's on stage, and he's talking to, I guess, a big youth group or a convention of youth groups. I don't know. And he's going on about how sinful we are, and how depraved we are, and how we, basically our condition. And they're applauding, they're clapping. And he kind of stops and looks at him real funny, and he says, I don't know why you're applauding.
Yeah, you're not getting it.
I'm talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's silence. Right? So I start listening to all these other guys, and John MacArthur, he preached through the entire New Testament, verse by verse. And it took him 43 years to do it. He is the best, if not the best expository preacher I've ever heard. And he goes deep. I mean, he knows Greek, he knows Hebrew, he knows the cultures of the time, and he really goes deep. And I started listening to these, and being in the truck, my evening before I went to bed, I'm reading scripture, and then in the morning, I'm listening to 2 or 3 of his sermons, right? Along with some of these other things. All day long, I can't get enough of this stuff. I'm soaking it up. And then Ray Comfort, I was watching a lot of his videos, and you know how he throws that law in your face, right? How many lies have you told? Have you ever taken something? You know, what do we call people who lie? A liar. So what are you? Liar. You ever taken something? Yeah. What do we call people who take things? Thief. So what are you? Thief. No, you're not. You're a lying thief, you'll say.
So you're a lying, thieving, lustful.
Lying, thieving, blasphemous, adulterer at heart. Yeah, right?
That's it.
Yeah. And I watched him do this 100 times, people. And I was just fascinated. And then eventually I realized, wait a minute. He's talking about me. He's talking to me. And I started to think about my life, my lifestyle. I never really thought that God was okay with it, right? But being a Christian, you know, I thought, I'll skate through. I thought I was a Christian. I said that so-called sinner's prayer more than once, you know. Yeah, Jesus, come into my heart, you know. And that's not biblical at all. Nothing, there's nothing in the Bible about saying that. And I was one of those people that was saved 4 or 5 times throughout my life, right? And so I thought. And things were really stirring inside me. And I realized that, okay, it's not necessarily the way that I'm living right now that's going to send me to hell. First of all, it was a big jump to even get to that point, to realize, listen, I'm doomed, right? The wages of sin is death, the Bible tells us, and it's a horrible thing to fall into the hands of God, of the Lord. And I was really starting to think, I'm not at the point where I think I am. And I also realized that it's not necessarily the way that I'm living that's going to send me to hell. I mean, it is, but it was that first lie that I ever told. It's that first time I ever dishonored my parents or took something that didn't belong to me. That's what's sending me to hell. I realized how serious sin is and what that is in God's eyes. And I'm thinking, I'm a good person, but I'm not a good person. So things were really getting stirred up.
The penny was dropping.
Yeah. I knew what I had to do. I had also heard about repentance, right? And I was studying this whole time too. I read in the Bible, and things were just opening up for me all over the place. And I had always believed in God, Jesus, the resurrection. But it didn't really have, it was no more important to me than my job or a favorite sports team or a hobby. It was just a belief that I had. And it was a blind faith. Now, at this time, I was also starting to study apologetics. And I started finding out, wow, there is real concrete scientific evidence for creation and for God. And there's all sorts of other evidence for Jesus and the resurrection. And that was fascinating to me. And somehow that made this blind faith that I had, it made it so real. My faith went from being blind to being based on evidence. And somehow that was having an effect on me as well. And I started to really consider my condition. I learned about repentance. I had heard that word, but I never really even knew what it was. I learned that believing in Jesus isn't enough. You know, everybody goes to that most famous verse of all, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son, that But whosoever believeth in him shall have everlasting life. Is that all it takes? I don't know. I started realizing that there's context. You have to take things in context. You can't just take a single verse out of context. And you have to look at the bigger picture. I also found that demons believed in Jesus. They knew who he was.
And yet they tremble.
And they trembled. And they called out to him, Jesus, what do you have to do with us? Is it before the time? They even knew their time was limited. And I don't think demons are saved. Pretty sure of it. Satan knew who Jesus was. So I started realizing maybe belief isn't all there is. And so I started over in John and I started reading the first part of John chapter 3. And Jesus talking to Nicodemus. And he says, truly I say to you, unless a man is born again, he shall not see the kingdom of God. And I saw those two words, born again. Whoa, hold on a second. Born again is actually in the Bible? I had heard that phrase, it was always used as a slur. That was what we call those radical Christians, that were going off, those Jesus freaks, oh, he's one of those born again Christians, I didn't realize that was the thing. So then I had to find, okay, what does that mean? What does born again mean? So I started reverse engineering it, and things just kept opening up to me. And I was at the point, well, I gotta say, when I learn stuff, I typically learn stuff and I write it down as if I'm going to have to teach that subject later.
Yes.
Because in a lot of cases, like in my professional career, I did have to teach things. But I find that helps me, just the idea of writing it down and studying this stuff and trying to imagine myself teaching this to somebody else. Yes, I want to make sure that I get it, because I don't want to be teaching something that's not true. So I kept hearing people online, not the preachers, but maybe they were talking to somebody on the street and said, well, God is all loving. God's all loving. They don't even understand the bad news yet. God's all loving. I'll be fine. I just want to be a good person. Well, first of all, you're not a good person. The Bible says you're not a good person. No one is good. No, not one. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Yeah. And they're saying that God is all loving. Well, I started thinking about this. Is God all loving? And I did a search throughout the Bible, and I couldn't find anywhere where it said God is all loving. And I thought about this semantically. If God is all loving, there's no room for anything else, is there? If God or anybody is all one thing, you can't be anything else. Now, God is loving, certainly, to a magnitude we can't even comprehend. But the Bible tells us God is also wrathful. And this is what most people don't hear. God is wrathful also to a magnitude that we cannot comprehend. And I thought, well, okay, that's something to consider. God is merciful and kind, yes, but he's also righteous and just. And he is going to be the perfect judge, the most righteous and absolutely perfect judge. Sin cannot even be in his presence. And I kept going back to how Ray wraps things up, So when you meet God on Judgment Day, guilty or innocent? Guilty. Heaven or hell? You have to get people to that point where they realize it themselves. They have to know their condition, just like I did. I didn't know my condition, so I wasn't even that interested in listening to the good news, right? So one thing held me up. Prior to all this, I had been perfectly content living out the rest of my life as a woman. My neighbor and best friend, Jane, she didn't know about me. We were best friends. She considered us sisters. We used to joke how we're just going to grow old, wearing our muumuus and smoking our parliaments, at the casino, dragging our oxygen tanks behind us. and that's how we'll go out of this life. And I started thinking about it. If I take this step, I knew what I had to do. I was right there at the edge. All I had to do was step over and just repent. I knew that was the part that had been missing all my life. But if I do this, does that mean that I'm going to have to detransition? And that held me up for a year. I wrestled with that. Partly because it didn't seem practical to detransition. First of all, I was way more entrenched as Maggie than I ever was as William. And secondly, certain surgeries, they can't be undone. So I just didn't see it at first. But I kept studying, and I knew a lot of people were praying for me, and I knew the Holy Spirit was in me and working. And I started to really dislike the way I was living. I didn't want to live out the rest of my life as one. It started becoming very abhorrent to me. Mm-hmm. And this was the Holy Spirit doing this, right? And it got to the point, one night, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I broke down, just bawling my eyes, just crying. And I called out to God, and I confessed my sins. And I asked forgiveness. And I repented. I said, Lord, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, I'd heard the term slave to sin, and it really hit home with me. That's when I realized I truly was a slave to that sin, and I didn't want to be a slave anymore. And I told the Lord that, and I repented, and I put my faith, my trust in Jesus. And I went to bed. And that wasn't an overnight thing, but over the coming days and weeks, I started thinking about how can I do this detransition. Like I said, it didn't seem practical, but I started working it out in my brain, and I started to find a way, and I started writing things down. This has to take place first before that, and I got to do this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I had to have a mastectomy. I had to do an awful lot of legal work. I had to have my name legally changed back, and change my passport, my driver's license, just tons of things. And
William, sorry,
Yeah.
I want to find out, during this time period, all these years, did you still, like maintenance, did you still have to take hormone blockers and all kinds of stuff like that? Or
yeah,
is it
well,
not?
not blockers, but I had been on the female hormones all that time.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so when I made this decision, late 2019, 2020, I stopped taking the female hormone. So that's about 5 years ago by now. And I got to tell you, Nadia, it's been 5 years since I've been off the hormones, and still, once or twice a day, I still get hot flashes. So I just wanted you to know what's coming up. What you're
I was
in for.
having hot flashes this afternoon.
Were you? Oh boy. Okay. You're not that old. Come on.
I'm not, but you know what? My mother went through menopause. Menopause in her 30s.
Yeah.
And I'm in my
okay.
30s. But I
Okay.
don't think it's menopause. It's just very hot in Africa.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's basically what it was for me, was menopause, you know, because I just cut off the hormones, and my body was used to that for so long. And yeah, and I still occasionally get hot flashes. It just drives me nuts. But it's, you know, I signed up for it. I'll deal with it. So I started looking for ways to get this thing done, and I started looking for a surgeon, and that was hard. I started looking locally for surgeons that could give me a mastectomy, and as soon as I would explain my situation, and when I mentioned that I was detransitioning, they didn't want anything to do with me. Every surgeon I talked to, they didn't want to do it. They were listening to me, they were fine, hi, how are you, very polite, but as soon as I mentioned that I'm detransitioning, some of them even hung up on me.
is it because of the culture, or
Yeah, I finally concluded that what I'm doing goes against their narrative. You know, I was dealing with a lot of leftist, liberal-minded, you know, people that are in favor of transing people, right? They didn't want people going back because it ruins their numbers. So that put me behind schedule quite a bit. And I actually concluded that I was going to have to go to an actual gender clinic in Tennessee and just tell them that I'm a woman and I'm transitioning to be a man and I need to have a mastectomy. And you remember those standards that I talked about way before? The standards that are designed to weed people out?
Yeah.
All those steps you have to do. They don't have to do that anymore. All that's been thrown out the window. All you have to do is go to one of these clinics. You don't even have to go. You can just talk to them over the phone. 20-minute phone call, and they'll give you a letter that you can take to your doctor, or any in your insurance company, because they'll even pay for it, and you can get whatever surgery you want done.
Yeah, they it's seen as healthcare. Am I right?
Right. That's
Same
what
as
they consider it.
abortion.
It's not healthcare.
Seen as healthcare.
Yeah, it's right. Not healthcare. No. So.
No, abortion is not healthcare.
Yeah.
It's murder.
Absolutely, it is murder. Absolutely. So I was getting ready to call this gender clinic, and just before I did, the day before, I finally got a call back from another surgeon I had contacted in Miami Beach, Florida, and he agreed to meet with me. So I drove down there, and he did an exam, and he said, "Yeah, I can help you out." Oh, hallelujah! And so we did. Of course, it had to be Miami Beach, Florida. That's a very, very, very expensive area, a place. People come from all over the world to have medical procedures done there. So it turned out to be very expensive. And but I got through that, got the mastectomy, and then started with the name change. That took several weeks to get that to come through. And then I had to get a lot of other things changed. And I finally got that done a year ago, October. And so for a little over a year now, I've been living as a man again. And I'm thrilled. And obviously I'm speaking out, I'm sharing the gospel, and I'm speaking out especially against what they're doing to children.
Yeah.
I want to throw a couple of statistics at you. There's the American College of Pediatricians has put out a report that says 80 to 95% of children with gender dysphoria, if left untreated and unmedically treated and unsocially transitioned, will resolve their issues by late adolescence. They grow out of it. And this is important to know because when I was a kid, and I kind of indicated how I thought as a child, children cannot make these sort of decisions. They can't even comprehend of the complications and the side effects and the risks that they're taking and how it's going to affect them into adulthood. As a child, if I had wanted to be a fire truck and my parents and doctors said that they could make that happen, I would have jumped at it. Mm-hmm. And if I had told my parents that I had wanted to be a girl, and I did, I didn't tell them, but if my parents and doctors said they could make that happen, I would have jumped at it. And if I had done that, I probably wouldn't even be alive today because of the issues with what the puberty blockers do and the cross-sex hormones, what they do to a young body. There are now hundreds, if not thousands, of young adult detransitioners.
Yeah, you see their
were
stories
transitioned.
online.
Yeah. And they were transitioned as children.
I have a book here. It's called The Return of the Gods, Jonathan Cahn. Have you heard of him? In this book,
Show me the cover. Okay. I may have actually read that a long time ago, but go ahead.
Yeah, what I found interesting about this book is that you mentioned earlier when you started having the dysphoria again after your marriage, you felt like it was something that came back with a vengeance. You know, like it had been ignored, like a different entity that was angry that it had been ignored.
Yeah.
And that stood out for me when you said that, because what he writes about is the pagan idols and the spirit entities behind those idols. And
Male and all those, yeah.
yeah, one phase of that is the gender dysphoria that existed back then, even.
Yeah.
And it's actually tied towards certain spiritual entities.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, I want to ask you, where you are now. You've lived this life that you have lived. God has brought you out of all of that. And looking back on your life, what do you think? If you look at your life and you reflect, what is it that you think? Why? Do you wonder why?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, like I said before, I always wondered why I was this way. And all through the years, I always thought if I knew why, somehow that would make it better. And never could figure it out. But now, I know why. And it's simply because there is sin in the world. We've all got something that we're dealing with. We're all born into sin. And so the particulars of that why, it doesn't matter to me anymore. Sometimes I can get a little bit angry or jealous. Let me put this into perspective. I had a sit-down meeting with my pastor and his younger brother, who's also a pastor, and they told me that they both were converted when they were in high school, and I know others that became saved at a very young age. And sometimes I think, man, why didn't I get it? Why couldn't I have been saved then? Why did I have to go through what I went through? And I'm getting ready to speak to the church I go to. They also have a high school. It's a Christian high school, and they've asked me to speak to 800 high school kids, and a goodly portion of them are Christians. I mean, they're truly saved. Now, there's going to be some that aren't, and I'm going to talk about that too. But I tell you, some of those high school kids and my pastor and his younger brother, they annoy me to no end. It just doesn't seem right. But I went through what I went through, and I have to conclude that was all part of God's plan, and I know that when I set out to detransition, I knew why I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it to glorify God. Even before I started the detransition, I was already speaking to people about the gospel, still as Maggie, but I thought, I can't just keep doing this because this is so hypocritical, and here I am trying to present the gospel, trying to put the law into other people's faces, and I keep going back to Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talks about, judge not lest you be judged, which is a verse that most people use against us, and they stop there. Bless you.
Thank you.
And when I'm talking to them, I say, why did you stop there? Keep reading, And so I knew even then, I've got to get this log out of my own eye before I can see clearly to take the speck out of my brother's eye. And so that's another reason why I wanted to really dive into the detransition. But now I think, I kind of feel like the lame man at the pool. He was lame for 38 years. And Jesus came to heal him. And why? Why was he lame for so long? It was so that God could be glorified, And I feel like now instead of being, now I'm not a slave to sin anymore, I'm a slave to Jesus, and I'm thrilled. And whatever he wants me to do, I'm in. I want to be used by him, right? And yeah, I've got this story, and it's a doozy. But I'm speaking out, and like I said, especially to young people.
Yeah, well,
'cause
I'm just like, praise the Lord that you're saved and that you're really making a difference and an impact everywhere that
Yeah.
you go. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for writing your book and
Oh,
sharing such vulnerable and personal parts of your life journey. I know those things don't come easy, especially if you've got family still alive and and they're gonna read about it. And
Yeah,
they're gonna know
well,
everything.
luckily, my family is very supportive, and a lot of them have read it, and they're fine with it. My aunts, the 6 sisters that my dad had, they all encouraged me to write the book, and one of them in particular, the one that was at the hospital with me and my dad, and so they've read it, and they're all very, very happy with it, and of course I wanted to portray my dad, in a positive light with them as well, even though the falling out we had. But it was done in a very loving way, I think, I hope. And yeah, there's some vulnerable parts, and certain chapters, like the transition. And there's a chapter called the exploration, when I was just going out and experimenting and stuff. Those were some of the last chapters that I wrote, because I kept putting it off. I kept trying to get in the mindset of that time frame when that occurred, right? So when I was doing this exploration, when I was transitioning, it was a very happy time. I was thrilled. So I tried to write like that. And of course, now that is a time that I hate. I can't believe that I actually did that.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to have to put myself in that mindset, and that was a hard thing to do, to try to write that as if I was going through it right then and there.
Yeah.
Alan,
And then, go ahead.
I just want to ask you a question. The same feeling that you got, this feeling inside you that you wanted to become a woman. Many years later, you had the same feeling to become a Christian, and you wanted to fulfill that, and you knew you had to go through. You were putting it off. The same thing, because I take your 2 stories and I listened to them, and I think you went through it and you pushed through and you kept yourself busy and just carried on, just trying to just not think about it. And as soon as you gave into it, it happened, and you made it happen. Many years later, you hear the gospel, the gospel, but you hear it again, and now you say you're driving in the truck and you're listening to this guy talking, and you're reading the Bible, and you're filling your heart with it, and that overwhelming feeling of just wanting to be accepted by God, like you wanted to be accepted by man or the world. Now it changed from the world to God.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's all that matters, right? Being
Yeah.
accepted by God is all that matters. I see the world differently now. I see people differently now. Nothing here really matters to me as much as eternity with Jesus. And the people, whenever I encounter people, I see them as someone who's saved or someone who's not.
Yeah.
And I either see a brother or a sister in Christ, or I see somebody that I need to talk to, that I need to warn. And I try to do it as lovingly as possible. Online on Twitter, I get a lot of haters, and that's okay. But sometimes I get to talk with people. They start out that way, but I'm trying to react lovingly, right? I'm trying not to fall into the traps that they're setting for me.
Yeah.
And because some of them are just trolls. Not a lot I can do about them. But I try to react lovingly. And the thing that I get most often is, well, you're just a hater. I could say something in a post or in a comment that in and of itself is not hateful at all to trans people. I'm just making a comment or stating a fact or whatever. But then they'll call me a hater. I'm a transphobe. And first I try to point out that I'm not afraid of trans people. A lot of these folks, they don't even know the meaning of the word phobia, right? So I have to point that out. And they accuse me of being a hater. I said, well, I'm not a hater. I don't hate trans people. I love trans people. And in fact, I love them so much that I'm willing to speak truth to them.
Because
You know,
love does
if
not
I
rejoice in unrighteousness.
Right. So I say, if I hated them so much, I wouldn't even bother. I don't care, right?
Yeah.
But I do. I love trans people. I know a better way, and I want to tell them about it. They don't have to follow through, but I at least want them to know. I know that I can't save anybody, right? But hopefully I can plant some seeds. And there's been a few people online that, you know, I could see their whole demeanor change in our back and forth comments, and I didn't convert them, but they changed their demeanor and were very nice, and they could see that they said, I could see in you that you're sincere and everything, and so hopefully maybe something I said will get through to them. Hopefully the Holy Spirit will start working in them. That's all
You
I
know,
can do.
William, it's so important for you to share your story, because your story can change a little boy that's sitting here now thinking about the same things you were thinking about. And then you say, in your time you had to wait a year to do the transition. You have to live with, now, like you say, you can go to your doctor, you're 6 years old, and you can now, a mother of a 6-year-old can now within a few months do a complete sex change.
Yeah.
When my daughter was 6 years old, she didn't know if she wanted yogurt in the morning or she wanted cereal. How does she know that she doesn't want to be a girl anymore? And if somebody just takes the time to listen to you and find out and hear the fears, and you can tell them the truth and say, look, I'm not a hater. I was a woman for more than 20 years. So it's just where I was in my life. If I had someone to talk to, it would have been easier.
Yeah, I have actually several questions, and I know we've been speaking a long time now, so you know,
I
if you're
told you that
still
would
here
happen.
hanging out with us, well done. Otherwise, pause and come back later. But so first question. Let me think. Oh, no, don't do this to me now, brain.
Second question.
Function.
Yeah, move on to the second one.
So, okay. Yes, good question. First one. How should we, as the church, be responding to the LGBTQ plus community? And let's just mention the fact that it is difficult. It's difficult as a Christian to understand exactly how to be loving towards the LGBTQ community. Because, first, they're in obvious rebellion against God, and you know it. And you feel as if your kindness, it somehow approves their lifestyle, which is a lie. So let's just recognize that lie. But then also you have the problem of, okay, so I allow these people with these open sinful life. Everyone has sin. Some people just hide it very well. So it's not about being who's sinful, who's not sinful, but someone expressing their sin in such an open way and allowing that kind of people into your life. And you have, for instance, young children, or how would you, you can't just invite them into your life. So the first question is, as Christians, how can we love effectively the LGBTQ community, people. And then secondly, if you can end us off with just maybe sharing a word of wisdom and encouragement, if you can, for people that have gender dysphoria, who maybe are listening, or someone like a mother or a father who's got children who have, these battles, what kind of encouragement can you give us? Yeah.
Well, I think we as a church need to get ready, and by that I mean learn something about the topic, do some research, buy my book, but learn about the topic, and go after these people. Several years ago, even when I was still Maggie, going to that church, my pastor one day in a sermon talked about he had gotten a letter from somebody in the church saying this gay couple moved in across the street. What do we do? And my pastor said, invite them over for dinner. It's an opportunity. Doesn't mean you have to become best friends with them, but invite them over, talk to them, find out what their story is, ask questions, and then at some point, lovingly try to share the gospel with them. As a church, if you bring LGBTQ people in, invite them in, fine. And if they're not going to respond to the gospel, obviously, then you don't want them to keep coming. You're going to need to let them know that they're not going to be welcome, because, like you said, they're obviously in rebellion to God. And there is a whole thing about you don't want them affecting others in the body of Christ, right? So, but initially, certainly approach them. Be nice, be loving, and look for the opportunity to share the gospel. Same with trans people. Bring them in, talk to them, or go to them. You don't have to bring them in, but go to them. But in any case, we need to get ready because, like I said, there's hundreds and thousands of, especially young adult detransitioners who were transitioned as kids, and they're mad. They're in bad shape physically. They're impotent. They've got osteoporosis, heart conditions. They're sterile, and they're scarred for life. And most of them have never heard the gospel. They need to hear it. We need to go after them. So, as far as talking to trans people directly, this would be true for the church and for families. A lot of people have told me about their sibling or their aunt or uncle or their father, a child that has gotten caught up in the trans movement. They're trans themselves. I was at the Florida Baptist Convention not too long ago, and a pastor came up to me. He heard my story during a sermon, and he came up to me and said his sister has been trans for 10 years, and he was just so distraught, And my heart goes out to them, and I pray for all these people. And so many people at my own church have told me about people in their lives that have gotten caught up in it. So it's a lot more prevalent than most people think. It's there. It's out there. Mm. But I would say, don't affirm. Right? Some of my family affirmed my decision, and I was on good terms with them. All during that time that I was Maggie. And I'm not. And I enjoy being able to spend that time with them and to talk with them, because my family was always very important with me. But a lot of them did not affirm what I did, and we lost contact for a lot of years. And the one side of the family was always trying to work on the other side of the family, trying to convince them to affirm me and to accept me. And they wouldn't do it. And now I look back and I think they probably did the right thing. Don't affirm it. If you affirm it, all it's going to do is keep fueling their desires. Okay? Be loving, obviously. I have an aunt that has a gay daughter who's married to a woman, and it's tough for them, very tough. They want the best for their daughter. They love their daughter unconditionally, obviously, but it's very tough. But they've sort of affirmed it, and you know, they have this other woman into their house and treat her as an actual spouse to their daughter. And I don't think that's necessarily the best thing to do. And you're going to hear different pastors with totally opposing views on this, right? This is just my view. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a pastor. This is just my view coming from, you know, my experience.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world if you don't affirm somebody, and if that means that you're going to be out of contact with that person, then so be it. You keep praying for that person, obviously.
Yeah.
You get others to pray for them. And I got to tell you, there was this one woman in my family. She was my dad's first cousin. And we were always close, even with extended family. And so growing up, I was very, very familiar, very close to this woman as my first cousin once removed, I guess it would be called. And I was at a funeral, actually, of an uncle. I should say Maggie. Maggie was there. And we were at the church after the funeral. We were having a big meal, and there were several big round tables. And I had not talked to this particular person, this cousin, for some time, since before the transition. But she came up and sat down to me, next to me. And I could tell she was very uncomfortable. She was trying to talk to me. She said, you know, she didn't call me by name. She didn't call me Maggie. She says, you know, you were a gift from your parents, or to your parents, from God. I said, yeah. And she said a couple other things, and she got kind of flustered. You know, she couldn't quite get it all out. But I knew exactly what she was trying to say. And this happened right at the beginning of my awakening, right? This is when I had already been going to this new church, and I was already studying the Bible. And I so wanted to just grab her and say, let's go into another room and let's talk. Because I had a lot of questions. And for some reason I didn't do that. But she got so flustered she couldn't finish what she was saying. And she got up and left. And I have told her since, you know, we're pretty close now. I said, you were the only person in the whole family who was bold enough to want to come to me and speak truth. Like I said, she didn't quite get to it, but I knew. I knew. She made that effort. She was bold. I have an aunt and uncle, and he's a pastor even. And they didn't approach me when they heard about this, what I was getting ready to do. They didn't call me. She was the only one. Even my own grandparents, very devout Christians. Now, they didn't know. This was all kept from them. But, yeah. But, yeah, this cousin, she was the only one that was bold enough. So, be bold.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Talk to your child. Talk to your sibling, whoever it is that may be going through this. Mm-hmm. Speak truth. Tell them you love them, and you love them enough to speak truth to them. If you see a train coming at somebody, you're going to want to say, hey, get off the rails. There's this train coming, and you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
And you have to speak truth. Be like Ray Comfort. Get in their faces. Mm-hmm. But do it lovingly. And I know that it sounds so hard. And it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
is.
especially in our culture where we do everything possible to avoid any sense of conflict or
Right.
feeling of discomfort. We just
Yeah.
don't want to deal with it. And
Right.
so we tend to take the easy road.
Yeah.
And when I say we,
Well,
I include myself.
yeah,
Yeah,
me
we,
too.
we do that. We're guilty.
Well, even with
Yeah.
sharing the gospel, do you know who the hardest group of people to talk to is when you're sharing the gospel? Who's the hardest?
For you?
For anybody
For
to share the
anybody?
gospel with. Who are the hardest people to share the gospel with? What was that?
It's Christians.
Your own family.
Oh, yeah, family.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. Because
yeah.
you're so worried about ruining a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes
And
this will ruin a
there's like
relationship.
this dynamic between people, and there's history, and there's familiarity, and there's all sorts of elements that come into play. It's quite easy
Yeah.
to speak to someone who doesn't know you at your worst. Hey, Nadia, I've seen you look down the
Right.
bottom of the bottle. Don't tell me the gospel. You know?
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
they don't realize that. Yeah, that's true. We know that we're flawed. We're sinners. We know that. We all are. You know, I've heard some people say, "Oh, y'all are just a bunch of hypocrites." That's right. Come on over. We got room for one more.
Sort
And the
of
looks on their
true.
faces, like, "Wait, what?" Yeah.
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 Well,
So,
William,
it's tough.
what can we say? I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wise
pleasure.
words of just advice. So, just to sum that up, be bold, don't be affirmative, be brave, speak the truth. And I think that's some good advice. And I think education is key. We need to have uncomfortable conversations. The time for having comfortable church is gone. It's
Yeah.
done. It's over. You in our country, you just have to drive, not even, I don't know, not even 3 kilometers, and you'll find your first temple. We've got it's a mosque. And then we've got Buddhist and Hindu temples popping up everywhere. And so I realize, and in Africa, spirituality is, we live in a state with, I don't know how many hundreds of people all around. Like if you could see our neighborhood, we have houses on houses on houses. We live in this security estate.
Right.
You can know that there are little altars in these homes that they bring things for the gods. And so
We have
there's
that here,
there's no misconception in my mind, at least, that I live in Babylon.
Yeah.
I don't live in Jerusalem. I don't
Yeah,
live in
yeah,
Zion,
yeah,
the city of God. I live in Babylon. And I think it is about time that we realize the time for warm, fuzzy Christianity has gone.
Yeah.
Oh.
And these are the end times. We are, ever since Jesus was here, we've been in the end times.
Yeah.
And things are getting worse, and they're going to continue to get worse. The
Yeah.
end is coming. Jesus will return, and he's not going to come back until all of his people are accounted for, right? So I'm going to do my part to lead as many as I can to him. And I mean, how could I not? Listen, I'm old enough now. I'm in my 60s. Frankly, if the Lord wanted to take me home today, hallelujah, I'm there.
I think those are the lucky ones. They get to
And-
go home before everything falls apart.
Yeah, but I have a feeling now that he's going to keep me here a while to do what I'm doing, and so
Yeah.
while I'm here, I'm going to do whatever I can to further his kingdom. Yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
and just a note too. You have the video that's pinned at the top of my Twitter feed.
Which I'll share. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm at WM Allen 2024. It's ALLEN. And the video at the top of that is my pastor telling my story at the end of a sermon. He had just preached on repentance. And so as I was finishing up the book earlier this year, I had been away from that church for quite some time because I felt like going as Maggie was like mocking God. You know, I just didn't want to do that. And I had been driving truck again, but I took time off to finish the book. And I could have started over at another church, you know, but I thought, I gotta talk to him. And because the thing is, he baptized Maggie years ago. And when I first started going to the church, and they announced a beach baptism coming up. They do that twice a year. And I signed up for it. And they didn't know. You know, in his defense, he did not know. And not only was I not a Christian, I obviously was not who I said I was. So I felt horrible about that. So in this, I wrote him a letter, and I told him about that, and I apologized, and I asked him if he could forgive me, and then I asked him if he would be willing to baptize me as William. And he called me the very next day and said, "Oh, of course, I forgive you, and yes, you know, we'll rebaptize you." He asked me if he could tell my story. I said, "Of course." And he said that very next Sunday, he was preaching a sermon on repentance, and he asked if he could use it then. And I said, "Yep." And he also said that that was the Sunday that they were going to do another baptism. So I got signed up for that as well. And so I went and met him on Saturday, the day before Sunday. We got to talk a little bit. So at the end of the sermon on Sunday, he told my story, and it starts when he says, "I got a letter the other day." The first 30 seconds or so are just the tail end of his sermon, and he proceeds to tell about the letter that he had just received, and it's a tearjerker. I think you've seen it, you've watched it a couple times. You said
3 times.
so. If you can, try to edit that into this. But I wanted to say also that there were 2 services that Sunday. In the first service, I went for the first time in probably 3 or 4 years, of course, as William. And I sat down, I sat by myself. Nobody around me knew who I was. And there were people there that knew Maggie, by the way. And he started telling the story. And it was tough for me to keep it together, because this is the first time I was being outed publicly. And he got a little bit emotional as well. And people applauded, and they cheered. And man, that felt so good. Oh, I could feel the warmth and the love in that congregation. It was just amazing. They were so welcoming. And they didn't know who I was. Just people sitting all around me. They were doing it, and I'm like playing along, you know. They don't even know that I'm the guy. I'm William.
So you were applauding too?
Yeah. I didn't want to look out of place. So, so the service got over, and I left, and Pastor was out there, and I went up to him. He shook my hand, gave me a hug, and I said, "Yeah, you told it pretty well." And I started to leave, and I got to the doors, and I stopped, and I thought, wow, that was an amazing feeling. And at the risk of sounding narcissistic, I turned around and I went back in for the second service. And I sat through it again. I sat through the sermon. I picked up a couple things I might have missed, the first time. And he got to that part again. So I got a letter the other day from a person named Maggie. And he started to tell about the letter. And people cheered and applauded again. And he even announced that I was going to be baptized that night. You know. And I've had that warmth, that love, that feeling again. But this time it was a little bit different. I realized they're not cheering for me. They're cheering for Jesus, what he did for me. Right? They're cheering for the gospel. They're cheering the sacrifice that Jesus made for me. And that made it just even more impactful. Right? And that's what it's really, really about. And they all knew that. And it was a few months later then he did kind of a follow-up and kind of reintroduced me in person to the congregation. And so I'm very active in the church now. And there were several people that I had to sit down with and apologize to. And they've all forgiven me because they knew Maggie. And they didn't know. So, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I've got an opportunity now. I'm going to be, like I said, there's a high school there. I'm going to be speaking to 800 high school kids here soon. So,
Yeah.
things are
That's
happening.
good.
I'm doing
No,
a lot of
that's
interviews
beautiful.
and yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you now
Thank you
call-
guys so much. Go ahead.
William, man of God.
Yeah.
Alan. William, man of God,
yeah.
Alan. Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you
William,
so
thank you so
much.
much for your time and everything, and we're so thankful. And not just that we get to know you now, but yeah, just God is good and He's so gracious, and
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we all live and survived ourselves is a miracle on its own. So thank you so
I'm
much
most-
for telling your story. Yeah.
Yeah. I am most grateful for his patience with me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for
100%.
having me, and yeah, tell everybody, get the word out, and God bless you guys and your ministry and everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And I'm going to be, so if you're interested, I'm going to be sharing all William's information down below, and of course his amazing book that he wrote, which I'm truly looking forward to reading, Not Man Enough to Be a Woman. And so we'll be sharing that, and yes, then we'll see you again
Soon.
next time.
Thank you.